Beginning issuing in 2005, the U.S. Army combat uniform has since been the standard field camouflage uniform for the branch, and though it's seen a few changes and overhauls over the years, it's mostly remained the same color-wise, bearing the universal camouflage pattern, the stopgap operational enduring freedom camouflage pattern, and eventually the operational camouflage pattern. But what's this? An all-tan colored one with a rank patch sewn onto a bit of hook and loop material that's in a rather odd location, not to mention trousers that seem a little longer than most? Kind of a strange assortment of elements, right? Well, yes, and actually that only scratches the surface, as this is a set of the short-lived and certainly less seen U.S. Army Civilian Protective Uniform, or CIVPU for short. Before jumping into everything though, we want to use this point to thank the sponsor of this video, Venture Surplus. Specializing in United States military surplus and related gear, Venture offers a wide variety of items, be they more common to some pretty scarce and hard to find. Whether it's uniforms of all sorts such as ACUs, ABUs, and Marine Corps combat jackets, to field gear like shelter tarps and sleep systems, MREs and first aid kits, manuals, plate carriers, night vision accessories, pouches, and so on. So if you're looking for that simple starter piece or that specialty one, chances are they've got it. You can find them at venturesurplus.com, link to which can be found in the description below, and while there, make sure to use the coupon code HISTORY10 at checkout to get 10% off of your order. Thank you guys, and let's now unravel the story of the civilian protective uniform. When one thinks of an army, naturally one goes right to soldiers, but oftentimes there's quite a bit of others working alongside them, frequently from other branches or agencies, but also civilians in the form of contractors, observers, analysts, consultants, administrators, and so on, which helps to fill the gaps and needs in a variety of roles that can't always be performed by soldiers. Though often these jobs see civilians wear standard clothing or ones suited for the job, on occasion they may find themselves in a hot zone or area where identification of who they are is paramount. Since World War II, these individuals, now often known as Army civilians, could often be seen wearing identifying insignia or accessories, with the most common being a rectangular-shaped patch bearing a small triangle and US, sometimes accompanied by their role or occupation. When deployed to conflict zones or embedded with troops in the field, often more steps are necessary, and as such, for a while the U.S. Army would issue civilians a variety of uniforms to give them a means to be identified much quicker. Early on, these usually came in the form of the same or similar as those that were standard issue, but by the late 2000s, when the U.S. was engaging in the War on Terror throughout the Middle East, things weren't quite the same due to the different styles of combat. Though by then it had been standard for a little while, civilians who were in uniform were often given older desert camouflage uniforms, or DCUs for short, and even sometimes ACUs with UCP, the then standard issue uniform of the Army. Naturally, as both were recent or current issue uniforms coupled with similar desert patterns worn by other nations and even some enemy forces, this ran the risk of them being mistaken for soldiers or other combatants, leading to potential security and other issues. To try and remedy this, the Army began work on something that would uniformly identify civilians quickly while also lowering the risk of them being confused for soldiers or other armed forces members. And so from 2007 to 2008, the Army Material Command talked with and pulled personnel from various staffs, sections, and leadership of the Army, eventually leading to a decision to use the already created Army Combat Uniform System as a basis for the new ensemble, as its features were already proven to be effective in many regards, not to mention it would speed up the overall process quite a bit. This led to Natick Labs and PEO Soldier, or the Program Executive Office Soldier, a department within the Army for quick prototyping, developing, and fielding of items for soldiers, put together a prototype version and sending it to AMC, where it was approved. Shortly after, in early 2009, a year-long pilot program to trial the new uniform began, which sought to not only test out the uniforms from a practical standpoint, such as the color holding up to staining, dirt, and overall wear, but also the concept of it overall, that being the same as its name, a civilian protective uniform. From there, the plan was to create enough pieces so that each civilian would be issued 4 sets, which would then see extras produced and stored away for future use, with the intended goal of them being issued to all Army civilians who deployed anywhere in the world. All that sounds pretty reasonable and thought out, right? Sure. Except it seems it never quite caught on. Being issued mainly, according to official sources, to AMC civilian personnel deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq, though most well documented with those working with the Army Corps of Engineers. Wearers gave feedback and input while the Army monitored its usage. However, after July of 2010 or so, they seem to have almost entirely disappeared, with the exception of one specific usage. But now would be a good point to actually take a look at a set while also comparing and contrasting it to a standard UCP ACU. Looking at the coat, it mostly remained the same, seeing only a few differences. The major parts remained unchanged, being the two slanted front hook and loop secured chest pockets, the adjustable hook and loop cuffs, a zippered front closure, a standing or Mandarin style collar, reinforced elbows which could have internal padding added in, 3 pen slots on the wearer's left sleeve, and 2 sleeve pockets which still had the infrared tabs and accompanying covers. The things that were changed though were a bit more subtle but make sense. The same shoulder sleeve pockets lacked the lower portion of hook and loop material where unit insignia would often go as it wasn't necessary. The top did remain, however, to potentially add flag or ISAF patches. The central square portion for attaching rank patches was removed, and the standard 2 rectangular strips for name tapes over the chest pockets were altered, seeing the one on the wearer's right, used for last names, remain, while the opposite was replaced with a much larger boxy one which would be intended for attaching a U.S. Army civilian patch. Looking at the trousers, apart from the tan color, nothing really changed as they all saw the same features, those being a button fly, belt loops and an internal adjustable waist drawstring, 2 inset waist pockets, 2 rear button secured pockets, 2 angled thigh hook and loop cargo pockets with elastic adjusters, 2 smaller lower leg hook and loop secured pockets, nylon draw cords at the bottom of each leg, and reinforced seat and knee sections, with the latter allowing for the addition of internal padding. Apart from all these minor visible changes, there was one somewhat significant one: the variety of sizes they would be offered in. Whereas the Army has height and weight limits and formulas based on age and gender, overall the minimum height requirement to join is 58 inches, with the maximum being 80, or about 147 and 203 centimeters. Granted, exceptions could be made to this. Generally uniform-wise, this led to 36 different sizes of ACU coats and 34 sizes in trousers, at least with the initial generation. But being that civilians aren't held to the same standards, more sizes were needed, leading to 39 different coats and 41 trousers with the CIVPUs. But coats and trousers weren't the only items, as there were at least 4 others which, at least when it came to surplusing, were seen far less frequently. Standard patrol caps, helmet covers which came in 2 sizes and didn't include the front communication flaps, sun hats aka boonies, and 2nd gen cold weather Gore-Tex parkas, which were again based on the then standard Army equivalents being made in 28 different sizes. Looking at the tags inside, they mostly have all the standard specifications, but when it came to NATO stock numbers, many, mostly the coats, featured F00 within the National Item Identification Number, that being the last 7 digits, while others, such as the trousers, saw MCN or Management Control Numbers rather than NSNs. In both cases, these signify that they were never officially entered into the national stock system, essentially meaning they weren't standardized nor officially adopted. However, even still, the scale of the quantities made became decently evident, as not long after the testing phase, quite a few of the coats and trousers, often in brand new unissued condition, hit the surplus market. But why? Why go through so much testing that saw huge quantities of various sizes produced only for them to not be made official? Well, it's something of a mystery, honestly, as the Army published an article in July 2008 talking about the endeavor and upcoming testing, but after that period it seems they went quiet about it, though an August 2011 document titled Uniform Wear and Appearance Standards for Deployed Personnel in Afghanistan was published, which had a section for DoD military contractors and civilian personnel assigned or attached to United States Forces, Afghanistan. In the relevant section, it pretty much reverted back to the standards as they were before the program, being all civilians would be issued DCUs but could also wear ACUs, as well as civilian attire, between business casual to professional, where permitted. All said, we can really only speculate, but it likely came down to 2 things. The first is pricing and logistics. Available figures for pieces relating to the civilian protective uniform, those being the coat, trousers, patrol cap, helmet cover, and parka, totaled right around $430. Conversely, the same pieces in the 3-color desert pattern were closer to $225 and $250 when it came to UCP equivalents. Not to mention, at the time there was a much larger and readily available inventory of these. Because of this, it made sense to axe the program, especially around that time where there was a lot of scrutiny surrounding United States Armed Forces uniforms and camouflage. Which actually brings us to the second and likely biggest driving factor it was never adopted: the Army's transition from UCP to OEF-CP and eventually OCP. Around the late 2000s into the early 2010s, UCP had proven to be at best a bad camouflage and at worst a dangerous one. And so after another series of camouflage developments and testing, OEF-CP, or the Operational Enduring Freedom Camouflage Pattern, or more commonly multicam, was was licensed by the branch and began being issued to soldiers deployed in Afghanistan, with the OCP design eventually replacing that and becoming the standard pattern branch-wide. Because of the swirling of yet more uniforms coupled with more camouflage patterns, the idea of another one for a much smaller group was likely determined to be unnecessary and was cancelled, as the DCUs were now twice removed from standard issue, while UCP ACUs were becoming less commonplace among soldiers, but still available in large quantities too. But that just leaves two questions. What's up with the specialist rank being sewn onto this top, as well as those clips of soldiers wearing them from before? Well, they're examples of end use for some CIVPU sets. As stated earlier, many became available to the public to purchase, but a few ended up in the hands of soldiers, particularly those assigned to opposing force. OP4 for short, for use in training exercises and war games. Looking again at this coat, on the left sleeve is the faint outline of where a shield-shaped patch once was, and when compared to particular units who often play the role of OP4, it was almost assuredly one used by a member of the Black Horse Regiment, officially the 11th ACR, or Armored Cavalry Regiment. Since 1994, elements of the 11th have performed the role of opposing forces at Fort Irwin National Training Center in California, and as such have utilized quite a few different garments and uniforms. These frequently come in the form of older or obsolete camouflage garments such as DCUs, but between 2012 and 2013, a number of soldiers were seen wearing CIVPUs, as they did a good job of differentiating them from standard ACUs while also giving them a level of concealment in the arid desert terrain. Some, such as this set, saw patches sewn on that matched, while others simply saw rank and other insignia from different camouflage garments attached via hook and loop. Since their large-scale testing and, for a lack of a better term, trial phase, which resulted in numerous uniforms produced, the CIVPUs are arguably the most prevalent U.S. Army uniform that has never really been heard of nor worn by that many people. Being created with good intentions and for decently practical reasons, it never quite caught on, and in a way was perhaps a prime example of spending a lot of time and money on a project only to realize it would cost a lot of time and money, leading to a much cheaper solution, which was more or less the status quo before the endeavor even began. Today, many civilians operating with the U.S. Army, Department of Defense, or Armed Forces in most capacities continue to be equipped with uniforms. Obviously, it depends on location, unit, and required work, but it seems that now, when the need for uniforms are there, the current issue ones are utilized, along with a series of unique insignia and name tapes to denote them as civilians. Though this is quite literally the exact opposite of what the civilian protective uniforms set out to do, it seems the short-lived endeavor did help the Army in the end with proper attire for its civilian workforce, just not the way it was intended. But either way, this unique uniform has today become something of a lesser-known collector's piece, with them still occasionally popping up for sale on the surplus and collector's market. And when they do, they still often raise some eyebrows. Hopefully this has helped shed some light on them for those interested and anyone who's gotten their hands on a piece, and once again, a special thanks to Venture Surplus for sponsoring the video. If you found it interesting and informative, perhaps leave a like and subscribe if you have not yet done so. If you don't feel inclined to do so at this moment, that's totally fine. Just make sure to check back again soon for more of the history of right here on Uniform History.